Alright, so this is a demo of how to handle baking in Marmoset. I'll try to use as few hotkeys as possible so you can see exactly what I do through this. So you want to start, if you've exported your high poly as an FBX or OBJ, you can open up Marmoset to a blank scene and just drag and drop your high poly. And your low poly. And that'll look something like this. Ideally, what you want before you export it is to center them on top of each other so you don't have to worry about realigning anything, because if they're misaligned, you're going to have problems. So line stuff up before you drop it in. If you don't, it's not so much of a big deal. You just have to make sure you move everything back as close to being perfectly on top of itself as you can. So this is what I've done before this is I set up some materials on my crate in my modeling program, but you don't have to worry about that if you haven't set that up already. As long as things are separate objects within your FBX, you can assign materials manually. This is a stage where you're going to be preparing for your future and making things easier on yourself down the line when it comes to masking out different colors on your model. So I'm going to set up, I want the crate to be the same color. So I'm going to make a new material over here. New material, color it red, and drag it onto the high poly. So the entire high poly is one color. This is just because I want the rivets to be the same color as the crate, and I don't want to manually drag and drop each color over and over again. So I'm going to set them all to red. And then I want the eagle to be a different color. So I'm going to take another new material. I'll make that one blue. And I'm going to drag and drop that onto the eagle. So yeah, there's two ways you can apply materials. You can either drag and drop onto the model itself, or you can drag and drop onto the name of the model in the scene view. So now this is set up for baking. As you'll note, I'm using floaters that I demonstrated in class. These can be moved as far away or as close to the model as necessary, but it is important that that the baking cage represents that later on. So what I'm going to do is up here, I'm going to make a baker, and this will give me an empty baker with a high poly slot and a low poly slot. I'm going to collapse the high poly and drag the entire thing into the high poly slot, and the entire low poly into the low poly slot. At any point, you can hide and unhide objects in Marmoset, and it will bake just fine, because by default you have use hidden meshes checked. You can uncheck that if you want to selectively hide and unhide things and do test bakes, but for the most part you're going to leave that checked because you can turn off your meshes and get an easier time navigating things without worry. So the next step is to set up my file saving paths, because Marmoset doesn't like to let you modify the cage without having a baking path set up. So I'm going to go to my demo folder. I thought I deleted those. It's going to kick out PSDs by default. Those are pretty easy to use. You can use whatever you want, but you don't have to worry about changing them. So PSDs, I'm going to name it whatever you like, because you're going to be using these as reference and not as your final images. So just name them something you can find later. You only need to put one name in. When it kicks out the bakes, it'll put an underscore and whatever kind of map you've just baked as the subheader. So down here, you're going to do some configurations. So samples is the number of times it runs the process. So higher is more high res. I like 16. 64 is a bit excessive. For soften, that helps it decide how to cast shadows and how to smooth things. I like 0.5, but you can go either way. Padding is very important. So padding, when you have a map like your let's see, what's a good one? Your material ID, or your, let's see. So the padding is these these weird striated pixels in between different UVs. And what that does is it takes whatever pixel is on the very edge of the break and stretches it until it meets another object. And this is really important because if you don't have any padding, then if your UVs ever drop or change, or if you're in Game Engine and your image drops resolution, it can bleed back into the model, and you'll get weird seams along your UVs. So always turn padding up as high as you can get it. And then we're going to choose which maps we're going to bake. Resolution is fine at 2048. I think that's a good working texture size for the class we're doing right now. And down here we're going to choose which maps to bake. Normal maps, yes. Curvature, yes. Ambient occlusion, and material ID. Object is fun. What object does is it tells you the up and down of any local space. So you can, with procedural texturing, you can decide like where light is cast, if it was cast from any point, and some other fun things. Another one I like to add is the position map, which adds a tells you exactly where any point on the model is in space. So as I demonstrated in the normal map demonstration, red is left to right, green is front to back, and blue is top to bottom, or some combination of those. I can't remember them off the top of my head. But when you get the top to bottom map, you'll have a gradient baked out that lets you tell exactly which part of your model is the top and which is the bottom, and it'll let you do some fun effects, like if you want to paint dirt in from the bottom up, you'll know exactly where you should be putting it. So I'm going to add my position map, and I'll show you how to dissect that later. All right, so everything down here is configured. Now we're going to configure the cage, which is this fun part. So setting your high poly to some vibrant off yellow color is helpful. Red is particularly good because the cage is this weird transparent yellow that's hard to see on certain colors. So make sure that your high poly pops so you can see exactly where your cage is not intersecting with the underlying model. For big changes at the beginning, you can adjust your max offset and make sure that, well, looks like just about everything is covered, and I'm not getting any intersections here. Again, these tight spaces where if I drag this out, it starts to intersect with itself. I'm going to have problems where it tries to double bake and other nastiness. So drag the max offset until just about everything is covered. And then for these parts that, in this case, my low poly has a slightly different silhouette than the high poly. So I have a weird edge here. So I'm going to go into painting the offset. By default, everything is about this like 75% gray, and that tells it how far relative to the max offset it should be away from the model. White on the value is further away from the model. Black is as close to the model as it can get. So I need to move this further away from the model, so I'm going to switch to white, and I'm going to paint on the model or on the UVs white and black as necessary. So do the same thing on both sides and make sure that everything is in working order. Yep, that's fine. And what's next is I'm going to paint. Actually, I'll show you painting the skew later because that'll be more easy to visualize once we have a model to work with. So this is all set up. I'm going to hit bake, and that's going to kick out my 4 maps. This is a quick process. Just let it finish its thing, and once it's done, you will have all your maps waiting for you where you told them to go. And again, so I have my demo underscore ambient occlusion underscore curvature underscore material ID normal and position map. So these, you can open them up right off the bat and start to get a look at what you've done and see how you feel about them. So I feel pretty good about this. What I don't like is that these rivets are a little skewed. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix that. And that's what I do in the when I paint the skew. So in order to visualize where I'm at right now, I'm going to turn off the high poly. And I'm going to drag a default material onto the low poly, and under albedo, which is another fancy word for color map, I'm going to select my ambient occlusion, and that'll help me start to visualize where I'm at with this. And under normal, I'm just going to select normal. And that'll let you see how the lighting is acting. So what it's doing is it is skewing these and pointing them off in a different direction, because if you look at the skew, when it averages, these little normals bend. This is the direction the camera is looking and the lights are pointing when they capture information on this model. So what I'm going to do is white is perfectly averaged, and it averages all around the curves and everything. So what I want it to do is look directly at the model. So I'm going to turn it black, and we're going to start painting. And what you start to see is it's going to instantly autocorrect your bake, because it knows that you're previewing with the same models that you used before. So it's going to start to look a bit straighter, whereas this one's wonky, this one's straighter, and you can see that these little green lines turn to red, and they're pointing straight away from the model instead of bending around the surface. So go to this rivet, do the same thing, and it starts straightening out. These guys, it's a bit more complicated because they're next to these ridges. So I need to be very particular about where I place the paint. Make sure it's straight on. Thankfully, the brush is relative to how close you are to the model, so you can zoom in and get as precise as you need to, and zoom out and cover broader strokes as necessary. I'll get that guy and get that guy. And the preview does not mean that it's baked, so you need to go back and hit bake again after you've done this. I'm just gonna make sure everything's straightened out. Give it a little bleed space. I don't want to hit these edges, because if I hit these edges, it's going to screw up how it's looking at that part. That's done. Go back to my baker. Once more, hit bake, and it will switch from just using the preview to using the official baked information again. All right, so that looks much better already. What we're seeing here is that the floater is slightly above the lowest point, so it's receiving a different amount of ambient light. But that can be painted out in Photoshop, and will be afterwards. And these guys are looking great. So some slight discoloration, but again, that can be painted out later. Important thing is that the normals are facing the right direction, and everything else looks crisp and good and ready to go. In Marmoset, I'm going to switch this to sRGB color space, which will darken it significantly, because Marmoset by default uses gamma color space, which is used for older color systems. And I'm not sure why it defaults to that, but I always switch to sRGB color space to see how your model would look in a game engine. And before we move on, I'm going to show you how to set up a good preview scene, so you can get a good look at your model and get a good feel for what you're doing. So there's some fun stuff. You can add a shadow catcher, which is a plane beneath your model that will simply catch shadows which come from your lights. So when you press the new light button, it'll place a light wherever the camera is currently facing, wherever the camera is facing. So I'm going to get a good angle where I think the light should cast from. I'm going to hit new light, and there we go. There's a light right there. It's that simple. And now I can see how my model looks lit and how it looks with a cast shadow. Sometimes when you start up Marmoset, you'll get a weird blown out scene that looks kind of like this. And that's because by default, it randomizes which HDRI image is in your background. So HDRI is used for metalness capture and reflections. It is a global image that just gives your model a little information to reflect off of, so it looks a bit more realistic. Unfortunately, these also affect the lighting, because they're affecting what kind of bounce light you're getting, and so on and so forth. So if you get these blown out white ones, like this gallery one is a bad offender of this, because it'll blow out all your whites. You can go into sky and choose from the presets. I like Castle Sunset. I like Bologna Portico, whatever that is. Museum is fun. But yeah, just play around and see what complements your model best. And then when you found a lighting scenario you like, you can change the mode from sky to flat color, and that'll just be a flat color with a nice lighting scenario. Okay, now into Photoshop. So what we have here, I'm going to close that because I changed it, and reopen my AO. I do not have a tablet right now, so I'm not going to do any fancy painting tricks, but this is where I would go back. and make some changes to clean things up. So with a medium opacity brush, I can go and paint that out. But there's also noise here, so another thing I can do is the clone stamp tool is very helpful. So I can get in there and use clone stamp to blend stuff back together, so I'm not getting any weird ridges where my floaters disconnect. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, so I can get on to other parts of the demo. Some basic cleanup. Save that. Marmoset automatically updates anything inside it, so as you can see, as soon as I saved, this starts to look a little bit better, though it could be cleaned up in these corners. Yeah, so that's fine for my AO. So now I'm going to start a new document. Dimensions of 2048 by 2048 because that's the resolution we baked at. Resolution 72. Resolution is only important for printing, so printing on physical media, so don't worry about that. But 72 default is fine. New document. I'm going to create a new layer, and so I can unlock the background because I don't need that guy. And on this first layer, I'm going to set it up with 50% gray as the entire thing, because this is 50% gray is really solid as something that you can overlay and multiply any value onto, and it'll capture the information you need. So I'm going to drag all of my baked maps into, except for the normal map, because that doesn't give me any information I need right now. I'm going to drag all of these into here, and they will fit the dimensions. Actually, I will do the position map later. So the color map is what I'm going to use to be masking things, and the AO is a bit of lighting information, and the curvature, same thing. So the AO, first of all, I'm going to set to multiply. So that's just casting the darkness onto this gray. So without the curvature, it looks like this. It's just adding the dark parts to the gray without adding the white. Turn on the curvature map, switch it to overlay. Overlay is interesting. So overlay, it follows the same math as multiply, but only for stuff that is darker than 50%. So note where the curvature map is 50%, it does not affect the 50% beneath it. Only when it starts to get whiter, it switches to add mode. Where's add? Oh, linear dodge is add. So normally, if you switch to add, it will add everything. So the 50% plus 50% comes to this white. 0 plus 50% is still 0. Or still 50. So what you want is overlay, which will only brighten where it is white and only darken where it is dark, and that will nicely combine with the multiply. So you'll start to get something like this, and that's really helpful when you're starting with a model, because you'll know exactly where your creases are, and like, oh, this isn't a straight line. That's weird, but you'll know that, and you won't have to find that out through painting, through trial and error, and you'll know like, this is exactly where stuff needs to be. So I'm going to set up the position map because that is also very helpful. So I'm going to open that up as its own thing in Photoshop, and I'm going to look at the individual channels. So red, if I compare that to this, so I'm going to look at like this is a flat plane on the side of my crate. So it looks like this is taking it from left to right. So with white being left and black being right. So I don't need that one. Green. Green looks a little closer to what I'm looking for. So it looks like white is up and black is down. In this case, it doesn't get to full black, so it's just dark gray. So this is probably the one I want. And blue, just for sake of things, is front to back. So this whole thing is in shadow, whereas the other side is white. So let's go to that green channel. I'm going to steal just that one. So I'm going to select all. Control-Shift-C should do it. Nope, never mind. In that case, I'm going to delete the other layers. And that'll get me down to just the one channel. So I go back to the outside, copy that. Nope, still not working. Yep, see it. Okay, so yeah, it was just Control-C instead of Control-Shift-C was what I was doing wrong there. So what this does is when I switch this to multiply, it starts to cast a shadow at the bottom of the crate and leave the top crate in light. I'm going to save this out because I'll be able to start previewing with this and save it as my color map. So demo underscore color. Back to Marmoset. Switch from just my AO map to my demo color map. And now we start to see, oh hey, that's looking like something. So it's darker on the bottom, lighter on the top, my edges are highlighted, and there's ambient information on the other side. Spam call. All right, so now we can go back and we can start adding color. So what's really useful about the color map is you can do that pretty simply. So I'm going to use the magic wand tool and select just the crate color, which is red. Depending on how many materials you have, this will change. It doesn't. There's no real way it prioritizes. So I'm going to select the red, create a folder, and when I hit the mask button, it creates a mask on that folder, which doesn't look like it did anything yet. But if I put that folder below the stuff that I'm multiplying and overlaying, right, add a new layer, switch to paint bucket, and say I want a blue crate. I'm going to fill that. And wow, look at that. The eagle is untouched and the crate is blue. Save that out so I can start getting a look at it. And hey, look at that. Again, eagle's gray, crate is blue, and we're in business. Do the same thing for the eagle. So select that guy. And again, back to the group, the layer, and click mask, and now the eagle has its own color. I'm gonna make this eagle pink, because why not? Yeah. So again, we have this pink, we have this nice edge highlight, and it's all contained in its own mask. So what's fun about this is that even though the material mask is already done, we can start adding, we can start editing these existing masks with your brush tool. Switch to like a hard brush. And say I want that rivet to also be pink. So I go into the eagle mask down here. I click on the mask, so I'm editing in full black and white mode, and switch to white. Because white is yes, black is no. And voila. Now the rivets are sharing the same material as the eagle, and the crate is on its own separate thing. Another fun thing about the about having this AO and curvature map is that you can use this to judge certain parts of the model that you want to mask out. So with using, say, either the marquee tool or the lasso tool, you can start saying like, I want these handles to be their own material. You don't have to guesswork anything because you already know exactly where those are on the texture map. Whereas in other situations, you might need to use like a UV map, which is just painful to work with and doesn't include the high poly. If I marquee out these handles, make a new mask or a new folder with a new mask. Now this layer will only affect the handles. And I can make those an obnoxious color. And boom, those guys are their own color now. Now some other fun stuff you can do with these bakes is, for instance, your position map. So that adds this this top to bottom thing. But you can use that as a mask as well. So if you select that, let's see how to do that. Anyway, you can hide that and duplicate it and start to use it for fun things like dirt. So if you want to take that one and add noise to it, Actually doesn't look that great. Anyway, well, if nothing else, it is a guide for where to place dust yourself. So if you have a chunky brush, it's kind of like that. You can throw that under everything else, and let's start painting some dirt. I don't have a tablet right now, so this isn't going to look great. But I know that this dark edge is the bottom and the light edge is the top, so I'm going to start from the bottom. I'm just going to paint some dirt on there. And I'll get into some procedural stuff in the coming weeks once I start showing you Substance Designer and the other fun stuff. And that's where these maps all really shine, because that tells the computer where dirt should go, so you don't have to do this part. So same thing over here. Do that, and uh-oh, AO's telling me that that's part of the other map, so I can just erase that out without having to question where I'm putting things. Now I'll cover that part too. It's the bottom. And how do I know it's the bottom? Because of the AO and the position. Save that out. And now I have a very dirty crate. That's great. Oop, missed a side. Alright, same thing. Over there. Cool. Now let's say you're not doing flat color, because you're not making Overwatch right now. Let's say you're using some Red Dead Redemption textures, for instance. Let's go steal some from Google. Say I want my crate to be made out of rusty metal. So I'm going to find a high-res rusty image. Thanks, Pixabay. I'm going to paste it directly into my texture. Now, in the olden days, this would be a painful process of cutting and pasting and stretching and finding exactly where the rust needs to go. But look at you have masks, so you can just drag it into the folder where you've already masked out, and boom, you have a rusty crate. Save that, and wow, look at that. Whole crate's rusty except for the parts that you've masked out for other purposes. Because let's say you want wood. Go steal some wood. Copy, paste, place it in the correct layer, transform it. Nope, wrong one. Transform that one. Now your eagle's wooden, and your rivets are wooden, because that's how you build a metal crate, right? Anyhow, this is the intro to it, but you can have a lot more fun with this. You know on this map where everything else is. So if you want more exaggerated shadows, just make a new layer on the top. Set it to multiply. Maybe you want red shadows, because that's fun. So switch your brush. Make your shadow go to red, and since there are layers on multiply, you can just start painting. You'll get this nice red shadow. That's on the inside of where the eagle meets the crate. Just cover that, and it's multiplying, so it's keeping the information underneath because it's not full black. So you're getting a little bit of that information underneath, and you can like paint your own fun shadows. Save that. Boom! You start to see this. You can make this really your own. For more realistic stuff, that's less of the case. But if you're doing anything stylized, you can go back, and you can also paint like your own edge highlights. So say I like these orange highlights, so I'm gonna exaggerate them. So I'm gonna get that guy, switch it to something that blends nicely. So I'm doing less work, and I'm preserving what I've already placed underneath. I find something that I like color dodge is nice, so I'll do that. Drag it out, get my edge real sharp and dirty. Maybe turn the opacity down a little bit. Now I have an exaggerated edge highlight. I can do that anywhere because I know exactly where all my edges are because I have a curvature map. All right, so for next week, go ahead and make sure that you have Marmoset. Make sure you've done your bakes. So bake out your your normal map, your position map, your curvature map, your ambient occlusion map, and your material ID map. Come to class with all those maps. If you'd like to start experimenting with those based on this demo, please do. Please have some fun. And yeah, for those of you who are doing photorealistic, it's probably behoove you to pull some texture reference that you're going to use. So find your wood grain, find your fancy things that you can use later, and bring those to class so you can start working with those. For those of you who are texture painting, go ahead and start experimenting. Start making your own painted textures, because you don't have to put a photorealistic texture down there. You can start messing around and say, like, I want to have a strokey thing. So go into Photoshop, start experimenting. Soften that a little bit. Say, well, as you can tell, I'm not a texture painter, so this is not my forte. But if you want like some fun stuff, you can start messing with that. Say that. Yeah, something. This is terrible, so don't use this as a standard. But if you have like paint daub, like if you have stuff like this, if you can find like markers or brush strokes, that's some fun stuff you can add. All these watermarked ones are no fun, but do not do this, but take a watermarked one and put it on your model. But the important thing is that we're getting this paint stroke texture, so that you start to have this. So if you paint your own paint stroke texture, you can apply it to this model, and it will immediately work with your lighting scenario, which is great, which saves you so much time and work. And then all the other layers are non-destructive, so you just turn that back off and keep doing whatever you were doing before. All right, email me if you have any questions, or post them on the blog. Again, that's dean.may@rccd.edu. One more time, dean.may@rccd.edu. Cool. All right, see you guys next week.